This year was quite a weird one for me when it came to keyboards. I essentially stress tested my brain's ability to adapt to a new shape every few weeks, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so much. But especially after the last one, I was seeking a break. I longed for the simpler days of the past, back when everything was still easier. So I did just that. I went back to the 40s. Yes, today it's all about a little keyboard, a 40% keyboard that is, one that I've been daily driving for the past 2 months now and have grown to quite like. It's a lot less feature-packed compared to what I've been showing on this channel as of late, but sometimes a little less is a little more. Getting the basics right is a task not easily accomplished, and the Core Plus, which is the name of this little guy, does just that, albeit not without its faults, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start off with a hardware overview like usual, before a clinical dissection, where I didn't break the board by the way, so hooray for that, before getting the inevitable conclusion including some alternatives if you'd like to dive deeper into this form factor. As you've probably already visually deciphered, we're dealing with a low-profile keyboard today, from a company called Vortex. Truth be told, I've never heard of them before, but they've been kicking around for a while. Not only the 40s though, no, they're also dabbling in the 60s, 80s, and even the noughties. At around $129, it comes in at an average price point in today's market, if you ask me. It's definitely not the cheapest, but it's also significantly less than some of the crazier boards out there. Personally, I think around $60 to $80 would have been better. However, considering the feature set and arguably unique and tasteful design, it stands rather lonely in the 40% court, especially when it comes to low-profile 40s. But as mentioned, it's not perfect. For example, the finish on my unit was unfortunately applied a little uneven, especially at the top center, where it looks like somebody might have mistook it for a magic lamp. The rest of the body is otherwise solid, both figuratively and literally, with a single clean-cut chunk of aluminium acting as the base, with the bottom part only containing an unmarked power switch and a mysterious cavity which we will excavate in a minute. Keen observers will have noticed my subtle yet aesthetically pleasing labeling job that I did. It's a little assistance I require to remember which side of the switch does what, while my 2 brain cells are fighting over the last potato chip. Flipping the board back topside, you'll notice the inner workings are slightly but permanently exposed. A bit exhibitionistic, I must say. I usually prefer more conservative designs, especially in the 40s. But I'm not too opposed to showing off a little cleavage. However, if you must, the carpet should match the drapes. Here it does not, and like the sentence I just uttered, it throws me off a bit. It might look better on the white or retro grey version of the Core Plus. However, judging by the pictures on Vortex's website, I think the only thing that actually changes between those models are the keycaps, but I can't say for sure, my eyes might just be deceiving me. Speaking of the caps, they are, like the finish, okay. The lettering is nice, clean and sharp, but they're a little less level than I would have liked for this price. I do like the profile though. I did later switch to Newfi's Oblivion caps and then to the new at 40 set, which I don't think works that great to be honest. So I ended up resorting back to the original ones that, honestly, simply look the best if you ask me. The caps aren't shine-through either, but the exposed sides show off the RGB effects nicely if you're into that sort of thing. I'm not. I had it off the entire time while I was using the Core Plus, which had a positive side effect on the battery life and my wallet. Let me explain. As mentioned, I've used the board for about 2 months now, having kept it at the office as my daily driver while occasionally logging it home. During this time, I've had to replace the batteries 3 times. Yeah, you heard that right, replace the battery, not charge it. That's because the secret cavity holds the required AAAs to operate the Core Plus. I was so unprepared for this sudden demand in old school power that I had to plunder my TV remotes, which are the only source of AAAs in my household. I also didn't expect it to run out of juice so frequently. It reminds me of, well, me after climbing a set of stairs, and just like myself, it can be somewhat remedied by taking a bit of a break in between. Terrible paraphrasing aside, what I meant to say is you can increase the battery life to about 3 to 3.5 weeks from 2 by turning it off when not in use. Yeah, it might sound a bit too on the nose, but flipping the switch helps. I think after years of rechargeable gadgets, I'm just not used to doing this anymore. You can of course also just plug it in. Not all of my cables like the rather deeply recessed hole though, but it does look visually very cool both when and when not in use. Alright, that should cover the basics. Let's take this apart and inspect it. This time, I'm really not going to break it. I'm not gonna lie, even after all these years, I still get a little excited taking apart my recent purchases. Not only for the thrill of not trying to break it, but also because I'm genuinely curious to find out if there's something new to be discovered. A method, a technique, or a trickery that gives us a clue to what went on in the engineering room and where they tried to cut corners in order to save costs. With all of this tantalizing tension building, you're probably getting excited to what I'm about to show you next, right? Well, there is nothing really. This one's pretty basic. Having said that, let's open it up anyway so you can have a look inside. I initially tried to get in from behind, but was denied access after hearing something rip. So I resorted to the usual approach, getting the top off first. Anyway, after having removed the 6 screws, the FR4 plate could simply be lifted off. There was nothing holding it back. There's a slim layer of foam stuck underneath it though, which can easily be removed, as well as low-profile stabilizers, or a stabilizer as there's only one on this board, which was nicely lubed by the way, as is evident by the grease stains present on the PCB underneath it, which needs to be handled carefully before lifting it out, as it is attached to the battery cavity, but after separation we can inspect it closer. It's basic but still pretty impressive in terms of density, with everything contained on a single board, including the power switch, which is made to rest against the physical button on the back that peeks out of the base of the case. Okay, this is actually pretty cool. Most of the time hardware switches are a big pain in the butt during reassembly. Here it was actually quite easy, as you can just place it back and then put the PCB on top. What I still don't understand is why they went with AAAs. From what I can see here, there should have been plenty of space for a rechargeable option, at least a small one. There are also a couple of layers of foam, including one at the base of the case, which is nice and leaves room for a little acoustic modification. Finally, the base is, as anticipated, a single piece of aluminum, sturdy and weighty. Apart from the finishing issues I already mentioned, this is a very nicely machined piece. And that's pretty much it. These are all the parts that make the Core Plus. Even though they didn't try to reinvent the wheel, I do applaud them for getting the basics right. However, when it comes to sound, the out-of-the-box experience was a bit lacking. I also tried it with hand-looped Gatoron Browns, which improved it a bit, but not enough if you ask me. A couple of months ago, I came across the new at 40, and missing its group buy filled me with frustration and weakness. So I went on a bender, desperately trying to find an alternative, until I eventually came across the Core Plus. A little hesitant at first, because for one, I had never heard of Vortex before, and secondly, I was looking for an ortholinear layout, which it wasn't. But after a couple of more unsuccessful searches, I eventually came back because besides its staggered nature, it checked a lot of the other boxes for what I was looking for. There was the Josfox Mazro, which is a little cheaper but also a little uglier, as well as a few unbranded specimens on sites like Etsy and AliExpress. But all my concerns vanished the moment I started using the Core Plus. I immediately felt at home, which isn't always a given. What I mean is the overall typing experience, where I sometimes struggle regardless of the size and layout. No matter if the keys are staggered, ortholinear, or even split, sometimes the board just doesn't click or clack, and the Core Plus did. I understand that this is a very personal experience and will most definitely not apply to everyone, but I found my own onboarding process very pleasant with this one. The fact that it came very well pre-configured helped a lot too. Let me elaborate on this, as I think it often flies under the radar. A lot of times when I purchase keyboards, especially with odd or small form factors, the default configuration leaves much to be desired. Meaning I have to set up all the layers by myself, figuring out where and what I want before being actually able to use it. Of course, to a certain degree I do this with every board, as I have my own layout preferences by now. But I always imagined that if I were a newcomer, I'd be lost with a keyboard of this size and no configuration to get me started with. And I know this because I went through this. The Core Plus, however, came fully pre-configured, with multiple layers and key combinations already set. Now, I still changed the configuration. Like I said, by now I have my own preferences, but I would have loved this as my first 40. Speaking of my own preferences, having used split keyboards, also in the 40% realm, taught me a lot about layers and how I like things to be set up. Which brings me to another point about the Core Plus that I really like a lot, its bottom row. For example, I love the split spacebar because it can be abused as an additional layer modifier or even as an enter key residing directly under my right thumb, just like the thumb cluster on splits. There's also plenty of other modifier keys off to the side, so you have tons of options to get your layer game started. Configuring it is also super easy, as it's fully VIA compatible, which, if you didn't know, is a very popular open source web configurator for keyboards. You will have to upload a config JSON though, but once done, you're off the leash. Now, if you've gotten super curious about smaller keyboards but don't like the low profile nature of the Core Plus, may I suggest the Zen 40 here. An absolutely lovely little board, of which there are still a few units in stock over at the Z Frontier. I bought the yellow version here and paired it with the Aperture Priority keycaps from Akuko Labs. There are of course many other boards of this size out there, but I would recommend keeping an eye out for anything that NuNu makes, as those really are the bee's knees if you ask me. Or go for the Minimi 40, which looks like another wonderful board in this form factor, that should be right around the corner by the time this video is done and goes up. Full disclaimer here, none of the boards or shops mentioned in this video, or anything else to be honest, was sponsored. This is just my opinion on my recent purchases. If you're still unsure about 40% keyboards, may I suggest a video from yours truly on this topic, my journey of conversion, which I did a couple of years ago and have never regretted. Don't worry though, splits aren't off the table for me. I do have much more to explore in that realm. For now, I just wanted something to relax, and this just felt right. And I hope this video was relaxing too. There's one more before the year's end, so stay tuned for a return to the living room. Thank you so much for watching and see you again in the next one. Bye.